Zhao Yellen sat at her usual spot in the coffee shop, surrounded by a mess of half-scratched equations and coffee cups that looked like they had seen better days. She had been staring at the screen in front of her for over an hour, trying to decode a set of encrypted data that, at best, might just be a misplaced string of quantum equations. At worst, another embarrassing dead end. Yellen had built a career on finding patterns in the most chaotic systems, theoretical dimensions, multiverse patterns, and now, obscure glitches in the digital fabric of realities. The coffee shop, with its endless chatter and clinking of mugs, should have been the last place for inspiration to strike, but sometimes, the city's background noise could help her think. "Hey, miss, you dropped this." The voice was smooth, almost too smooth. Yellen looked up from her laptop screen to find a stranger in a long coat leaning over the counter, a small, crumpled piece of paper in his hand. His eyes were sharp, as though he was measuring her in some way, like a predator sizing up its prey. Yellen wasn't easily intimidated, but something about this stranger set her on edge. She took the paper with a nod. "Thanks." Her tone was cold, but she didn't have time for pleasantries. The stranger only nodded back before sliding out the door, leaving the coffee shop as quietly as he'd entered. Yellen opened the paper, expecting some kind of advertisement or cryptic note from a prankster, but the handwriting was strange, neatly scrawled symbols that looked more like ancient runes than anything remotely modern. Her curiosity piqued. She grabbed her phone and quickly snapped a picture of the strange symbols. With a swipe of her fingers, she ran them through the advanced decryption software she had developed. What she expected to be gibberish turned out to be a complex set of coordinates and instructions. At first, it didn't make sense. Coordinate data? A hidden portal? The words, dimensional manipulation, popped up on the screen. Her pulse quickened. Was this a prank? Someone trying to mess with her? But as the code decrypted further, the instructions shifted from theory to practical application, each line teaching her how to access and interact with the very laws that govern different dimensions. Yellen laughed aloud at the absurdity. It was just a stupid prank. There was no such thing as dimensional manipulation. Right? Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the world around her had just subtly changed. That evening, Yellen returned to her tiny apartment, a cluttered space filled with books on quantum mechanics, particle physics, and metaphysical theories. She had put the cryptic paper out of her mind, too focused on the upcoming lecture she was giving on the multidimensional nature of reality. But after hours of working, she finally decided to take a nap, collapsing onto the couch, her head spinning with the strange symbols, and when she woke, everything was different. The sunlight streaming through the window looked wrong, too golden, too vibrant. Yellen rubbed her eyes, but nothing changed. The city outside seemed quieter, the streets eerily empty, and when she stepped outside, the buildings were oddly unfamiliar. A strange sound filled the air, a distant hum that resonated through her bones. It wasn't until she turned the corner and found a group of what could only be described as monstrous beings, humanoid, but with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that flickered with unnatural light, that she knew something was terribly wrong. This wasn't the world she had woken up in. Panic surged within her. Yellen stumbled back, trying to make sense of the absurdity unfolding around her. Was this some kind of dream? A hallucination? Before she could react, one of the beings, tall and imposing, stepped forward. "You are the one who triggered the sequence," it said in a voice that seemed both alien and familiar at once. "You have accessed the laws." The words struck her like a thunderclap. "No, no, no," Yellen muttered, backing away. This can't be real." But the creature stepped closer, its form flickering, warping in ways that defied logic. It was no hallucination. The laws of dimensional warfare were real, and somehow, she had opened a door to the heart of the conflict. The creature raised its hand, and Yellen felt a sharp sting in her chest. The world around her fractured, shifting. She fell to her knees, the noise of the city warping, the colors of the buildings twisting like melting paint. And then, just as quickly as it had happened, the world snapped back into place. The creature was gone. The city was the same, but Yellen was no longer sure it was her city. And the strange piece of paper from the coffee shop? It was now burned into her memory, along with a whispered warning. The war you're looking for doesn't exist in the way you think. You've been playing checkers, it's time to learn chess. Chess. Yellen thought, trying to make sense of it all. She had no answers, only a deep, gnawing feeling that she had just become a player in a game that spanned worlds beyond her comprehension. The following days felt like a fever dream. Yellen struggled to reconcile her academic understanding of the universe with the bizarre, palpable reality she now found herself entangled in. She was convinced that the encounter had been more than just a hallucination. There was something fundamentally wrong, something off about the world around her. She had been thrust into a war, one that stretched across the very fabric of reality itself. And from the moment she stumbled into that strange, alternate version of her city, she knew she could no longer pretend this was a simple mystery to solve. This was real. That was when she met Roxanne. Roxanne was a time traveler, or so she claimed, but if Yellen was being honest, she wasn't entirely sure Roxanne was a she. The other woman, or whatever she was as unpredictable as she was charming, a perfect foil to Yellen's meticulous, methodical nature. Yellen was at her apartment late one night, trying to decode the symbols and texts she'd found, when the door to her living room suddenly swung open. Roxanne stepped inside as if she owned the place, a cheeky grin plastered on her face. Well, if it isn't the queen of equations herself," Roxanne said with a wink, taking a seat on Yellen's couch as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "I've been waiting for you to figure it out." Yellen barely managed to suppress a scream. She didn't know how Roxanne had found her, or, frankly, if she even cared, but there was something about the stranger's confidence that made her feel like the world was slipping further out of her control. Roxanne went on, undeterred. "Listen, you're not the only one who's been dabbling with dimensional shifts. You've triggered something bigger than you can imagine, and now, you've got two choices: sit back and watch as everything burns, or join the fight." Yellen narrowed her eyes. "What fight?" "The architects," Roxanne said with a knowing look, leaning forward. "They've been playing us all for fools. Using the laws to create an unbalance across worlds. And you, my friend, have a key they need to control." Roxanne's words made something click in Yellen's mind. The laws weren't just some theoretical construct, they were the very foundation of reality itself. And the architects weren't just invaders, they were power brokers manipulating the flow of the multiverse, bending it to their will. Yellen's pulse quickened as she began to understand the scope of what was happening. She wasn't just a passive observer, she had become a key player in a game that spanned dimensions, timelines, and realities. "We'll have to break the laws if we're going to stop them," Roxanne added, as if reading Yellen's thoughts. "But first, we need to learn how to use them. And I think you're just the person to help us do that." Yellen stood there, frozen for a moment, before she took a deep breath. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure: this wasn't a fight she could ignore. The multiverse was at stake. And she had just learned that the rules of war weren't written in any book she had ever read. The air in Yellen's apartment was thick with tension as she stared at Roxanne, trying to process everything she had just heard. The idea that she had somehow triggered a war across dimensions, a war fought with the very fabric of reality itself, was almost too much to take in. And yet, there was no denying it. She could feel the change in the world around her, the subtle but undeniable shift in the laws of physics, the flickering distortions in the space between moments. "So, let me get this straight," Yellen said, her voice shaking slightly as she tried to ground herself in something resembling logic. "You're telling me that there's a group of beings who can manipulate dimensions, and they've been using these laws to control everything, and now they want to take over everything?" Roxanne grinned like someone who had just been handed the winning lottery ticket. "Exactly. The architects are an ancient order, sort of like the original architects of the multiverse. They've been around for eons, shaping and bending the rules of reality to maintain control over the various dimensions. They know all the tricks, all the loopholes. And now, they're coming for all of them." your world, my world, every world they can access. Yelen's mind was racing. She tried to think back to everything she had studied, every theory she had ever encountered. But it was all suddenly irrelevant. The laws, the fundamental rules that governed the interactions between dimensions, were real. And she had somehow found herself in the middle of a war over them. But why me? She asked. I'm just a researcher. I don't have any special powers or knowledge beyond what I've been studying. Why do they want me? Roxanne leaned back on the couch, arms behind her head as if she were simply passing time, when in reality, every word she spoke could alter the course of the multiverse. Oh, sweetie, she said with a wink, you're not just any researcher. You've got something that the architects want, something they can't get anywhere else, access to the reverse perception of the laws. Yelen furrowed her brow. Reverse perception? What does that even mean? Roxanne chuckled. Well, it means you can see the laws in their original, unaltered state. Before the architects twisted them to serve their own agenda. You're like a walking loophole. And trust me, they'd love to get their hands on that kind of power. Yelen felt a chill run down her spine. The idea of being a walking loophole didn't exactly sit well with her, especially if it meant becoming a target for interdimensional beings who could reshape reality itself. So, what now? She asked, her voice steadier now as she stood up, pacing the room. How do we stop them? How do we fight back? Roxanne smiled, an expression that was both reassuring and terrifying at the same time. That's the fun part. We don't just fight them, we outsmart them. They've been using the laws for so long, they've forgotten what they originally were. But she pointed at Yelen and then at herself, we still remember. We've got the advantage. And together, we can break their hold on reality. We just have to learn how to use the laws properly. Yelen stopped pacing and looked at Roxanne, the weight of the situation settling in her chest. The road ahead was anything but clear, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that there was no turning back. The world she had known had already begun to unravel, and the only way to stop it was to fight back, to play the game that the architects had set up. But she had no idea how to begin. How do we learn these laws? Yelen asked, her voice a little strained. Where do we even start? Roxanne's grin widened. Well, that's the next step. First, we get you trained. I've got a few friends scattered across different worlds who can help. They've been hiding for years, trying to stay under the radar of the architects. But they owe me a favor, and I'm calling it in. The next few days were a blur of activity. Roxanne, true to her word, took Yelen to places she had only read about in her wildest theories. They hopped between dimensions with a speed that made Yelen's head spin, visiting worlds that seemed impossible to comprehend. Some were familiar, a mirror of Earth, but with slight, unsettling differences, while others were so alien that they left Yelen breathless with their sheer impossibility. There were worlds where time flowed backward, where gravity was an illusion, and others where the laws of physics didn't seem to apply at all. At each stop, Roxanne introduced Yelen to someone new, dimensional outcasts, exiles from worlds that had already fallen under the control of the architects. These individuals were eager to teach Yelen what they knew about the laws, to help her unlock the secrets that had been hidden for so long. The training wasn't easy. Yelen's brain was stretched to its limits as she tried to absorb the complex, often contradictory rules that governed the interaction between dimensions. She learned how to manipulate time, how to fold space, and how to tap into the energy that flowed between realities. But it was a delicate balance. Each new piece of knowledge seemed to open up more questions, more possibilities, until Yelen felt as if she were drowning in a sea of infinite realities. Through it all, Roxanne was a constant presence, guiding her with a mixture of tough love and encouragement. They clashed often, Yelen's cautious, analytical nature butting heads with Roxanne's free-spirited, impulsive approach, but the two of them grew closer, bound by a shared mission that was bigger than either of them. It wasn't long before they discovered the first major break in the architect's plans. "Look at this," Yellen said, pointing to a glowing holographic map of the multiverse that they had stolen from one of the architect's safe houses. The map showed a network of interconnected worlds, each one marked with a symbol that represented a different version of the laws. Some were distorted, others untouched, but one world stood out, a world where the laws had been completely rewritten, a world at the heart of the architect's empire. Roxanne leaned in close, her eyes scanning the map. "That's it. That's where we hit them. How do we get there?" Yellen asked, her mind already racing with the implications of their discovery. "How do we break in?" Roxanne smirked. "That's where the real fun begins. We'll need to gather a team, make sure we've got the right tools, and then we strike fast. We don't have much time before the architects catch wind of what we're doing." Yellen felt a surge of adrenaline. She didn't fully understand the scope of what they were about to do, but she knew one thing for sure: they had to stop the architects, or else everything they knew would be destroyed. As they prepared for the final confrontation, Yellen couldn't help but think back to the stranger in the coffee shop, the one who had handed her the cryptic note. "The war you're looking for doesn't exist in the way you think." It was only now that she truly understood what he had meant. The war wasn't just about fighting the architects. It was about understanding the true nature of reality itself, and rewriting the rules. The final stages of their plan were chaotic, a blur of strategy and confusion as they assembled a team of outcasts, rebels, and unlikely allies from across the multiverse. There were beings from worlds that had been destroyed by the architects, each one driven by a thirst for vengeance and a desire to reclaim what had been taken from them. Together, they would infiltrate the heart of the architect's empire and destroy their ability to control the laws. The journey to the architect's stronghold was unlike anything Yellen had ever experienced. Reality itself seemed to bend and twist around them as they traveled, the very fabric of space warping in ways that defied understanding. But with each new step, Yellen grew stronger, more attuned to the laws, and more confident in her ability to change them. At the final moment, when they breached the architect's inner sanctum, Yellen stood before the heart of their empire, the device that controlled the flow of reality itself. It was a towering structure, a monolithic machine that hummed with a dark energy, pulsating with the power to rewrite the very laws of the multiverse. Roxanne turned to Yellen, her face lit by the eerie glow of the machine. "This is it. You know what you have to do." Yellen nodded, stepping forward, feeling the weight of the multiverse pressing down on her. She raised her hand, reaching out to the machine, and for the first time, she felt the full power of the laws course through her. And then, with a single, decisive gesture, she rewrote them. The architect's grip on reality shattered, their empire crumbling in an instant. The worlds they had controlled collapsed, their distorted versions of the laws unraveling as the true nature of the multiverse was restored. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Yellen breathed easy. She had done it. She had saved the multiverse, and in the end, she knew the fight was far from over. But for now, the battle was won. The world around Yellen shifted again. For a moment, she stood still, the hum of the architect's machine still vibrating through the air, the remnants of their power fading as their empire disintegrated. She felt it, an enormous, liberating shift, as if a weight had been lifted from every dimension, from every timeline. The laws were restored, the true fabric of reality beginning to reknit itself, and Yellen had been the one to pull the threads apart and then weave them back together. But even as she stood there, hands outstretched, feeling the pulse of restored balance, she knew it wasn't over. No war, no matter how monumental, was ever truly finished, not when you were fighting something that vast. Something so insidious, that had shaped every reality, every corner of the multiverse for centuries. Roxanne stepped beside her, her eyes flickering with the same unspoken understanding. "You did it. I can feel it. We've won." Yellen didn't reply immediately. She looked at the crumbling remnants of the machine, its hum quieting, the ominous glow fading into the flickering shadows. There was a finality to it that made the victory feel hollow, as though the real cost was still waiting to be paid. we haven't won anything yet, Yellen said, her voice steady but with an edge. She turned away from the wreckage, her mind moving faster than her body, piecing together the puzzle. This is just the beginning. Roxanne let out a soft laugh, but it was a hollow sound, like she was acknowledging the truth with no real intention of following it up. You're always the practical one. Just admit it, this is a victory. But Yellen couldn't let herself relax. Not now. She felt it in her bones, an underlying disturbance that still rippled through the multiverse, as if something deeper, more fundamental, had been disrupted. We need to check the others, Yellen said, the urgency in her voice growing. The other worlds we've touched. The ones where the architects were in control. If their influence was that widespread, if we've broken their hold here, we don't know how far the damage goes. Roxanne followed her gaze, her usual bravado replaced by a rare seriousness. All right. So we jump back into the chaos. Let's go. And just like that, Yellen's hand found its way to her pocket, pulling out the device that allowed them to navigate between dimensions, her lifeline in this war. The same device that had been used to carry them into worlds unknown, worlds on the brink of collapse. She had never expected it to come to this, using a tool designed for research to turn the tides of an entire multiversal conflict. She pressed a button, and the air around them rippled. The familiar pull of dimensional travel tugged at her body, a strange combination of disorientation and weightlessness. The next moment, the world around them shimmered and dissolved, and they were gone. The first world they visited was a shattered reflection of their own. The sky was tinged a sickly green, the ground cracked and dry, with jagged peaks that rose unnaturally high. There was no life, no sound except the faint echo of wind howling through the jagged terrain. Yellen could feel the presence of something, but it was distant, as if the world itself was in a state of mourning. Another casualty of the architects, Yellen murmured under her breath. No kidding, Roxanne replied, eyes scanning the horizon. But if we've done our job, this world should be free. At least, it should be. As they made their way through the barren landscape, something shifted. A low hum. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and from the shadows of the mountains, figures emerged. These weren't the architects. These weren't even dimensional invaders, they were survivors. Those who had lived under the architects' control, who had fought and resisted in secret. And now, it seemed, they were waiting for something. Waiting for hope. Yellen took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the device. The pull of the multiverse was calling to her again, demanding that she fix things, set right the wrongs that had been done. The world wasn't ready to heal. Not yet, but she would try. And so, without hesitation, she began speaking in the language she had learned from the rebels, from those who had been hiding in the shadows. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Enough to offer them an explanation, to offer them the truth about what had happened, and what was still to come. The survivors gathered around them, eyes wide and expectant. Yellen's voice faltered only once as she explained the nature of the architects, how they had been the hidden rulers of the multiverse, how they had shaped reality to their whims. She spoke of the laws, of their distortion, and the crucial role she had played in their restoration. She had no illusions that the world could recover instantly, or that the war was truly over. But at least there was a chance. A sliver of hope, waiting to be nurtured. When she finished speaking, the survivors stood in silence for a long moment. Then, one by one, they bowed their heads. And though they didn't speak, Yellen could feel the weight of their gratitude, of their recognition that the war was not entirely lost, not anymore. It would take time. But time was something they now had. Roxanne placed a hand on Yellen's shoulder, offering a rare, quiet smile. You did it. They'll rebuild. We all will. But Yellen didn't feel that relief yet. The multiverse was vast, and though one world had been freed, there were countless others that still teetered on the edge. She didn't know how long it would take to repair the damage the architects had done, how many more worlds were still under their control, how many would fall into chaos before everything was set right. So, without further discussion, they stepped into the device again and traveled to the next world, and then the next. It became a ritual, moving through the fractured, haunted dimensions, speaking with survivors, offering what help they could, and leaving behind the faintest hope of restoration. But with every jump, Yelen's mind became more and more consumed with a nagging question. Something the architects had never shared with her, something that lingered in the back of her mind. If the architects had been manipulating the laws, what else had they hidden? What if their war against the multiverse had a deeper, darker purpose? What if there was more at play here than they had ever realized? One world after another, Yelen and Roxanne fought, healed, and helped rebuild. It was slow. It was hard. But they did it. And in the darkest corners of the multiverse, where the architects had once ruled with impunity, there was now light. But even as they moved from world to world, the questions remained. Yelen could feel them, like an itch she couldn't scratch. It wasn't just the architect's twisted version of the laws that worried her, it was something else. Something far more dangerous. And she was determined to find it, no matter where it led her. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity of traveling, of saving worlds, Yelen paused. She stood before an ancient temple on a world that had barely survived the conflict, the sky dim with the aftershocks of what had happened. Something here felt different, as if the ground itself was telling her to stop. She felt it then, the sensation of being watched, the faint flicker of something or someone that had been waiting for her. Roxanne. Yelen whispered, her voice tight with realization. We're not done. Not yet. Roxanne, sensing the shift in Yelen's demeanor, stepped closer, eyes scanning the darkened temple. What's going on? Yelen's mind raced as she pieced it all together, the culmination of everything she'd learned, all the strange feelings and suspicions she'd held on to. There's someone else. Someone we've missed. Someone who's been behind it all. Roxanne's expression hardened. Who? Yelen didn't answer, not yet. But she knew. She knew the war wasn't over. Not as long as there was someone out there, someone pulling the strings in the shadows of every world they'd visited. They weren't done. Not by a long shot.